this is better. This is the first anvil I ever touched. I was probably about 12, maybe 10 years old probably. And we lived in a place just about 4 miles down the road. And I remember as clear as day going out in the driveway. I'm glad I had sense enough to build the fire in the driveway. Built a little campfire, had a pair of pliers, had some 16-penny nails, and I'd let them roast in that little campfire until they got kind of a dull orange. And then I'd put them on this little anvil, and I had my dad's S-twing leather wrap finish hammer. Bing, 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 and flatten those things out. And man, I thought, wow, that's cool. What am I going to do with it? I don't know, but let's do it again. Anvils have always had value. Now there was a short period of time from maybe, and I'm making this up, but probably from around 1910, 1915 to 1950, where arc welders and lathes and milling machines showed up. The machine shop and the fabrication shop displaced the blacksmith shop. And so the blacksmiths either retooled or died. And with the exception of that window of time, for all of time previous and for the last 60 years, anvils have had value, and right now the value is growing like crazy in the United States, which is part of what I want to talk about. But isn't it interesting that something as simple, if you will, or at least as elemental as an anvil has always had value? It had value because they were hard to make. And anything that is hard to make, anything that requires labor and intelligence and capital to make is always going to have some value. I rather expect, and I have no data to support this, but that in 1810, a young man who was going to be a blacksmith, who had been working as an apprentice, as a helper, as a striker, sweeping the floors, and finally journeying out and being ready to set up his own smith somewhere, was helpless without an anvil. And he had been saving his money. And I would bet a lot that it was expensive, that it was daunting to be able to scrape together the shillings, the dollars, the francs, the guineas. I don't care where you were. It was hard to scrape up the money that you needed to buy that first anvil so you could begin to make your own way in the world. So my point in pointing back in time and speculating about how hard it was to ever get an anvil is, don't whine if you're having a hard time finding an anvil you can afford. Don't be surprised if they're expensive. There was a sale on anvils. It happened 80 years ago. We missed it. And right now, they fully reflect the laws of supply and demand, and that's this. Anytime you have a high demand and a limited supply, it's going to be a high price. Here's the silver lining to high anvil prices. It now makes sense for people to manufacture anvils. There are top quality cast steel anvils on the market that you can buy at prices that just are, in fact, fair. Now, they're still expensive because there's lots of work and lots of expertise represented in that anvil. And there has to be, or it would be junk. But it's not junk, it's quality. Therefore, don't be surprised if you have to spend some money. But my point is that this increasing demand, decreasing supply, has created a situation where the supply is beginning to come up. Eventually, that's going to manifest in prices going back down. But for now, if you're frustrated because you don't have an anvil, just exercise some financial responsibility and squirrel away some dollars. And before you know it, you're either going to A, find the deal on the antique anvil, or B, get online and find a supplier of anvils and figure out what it'll cost and what the shipping would be, or maybe it's in your hometown and you'll have your anvil. My perspective on anvil ownership is that I don't own it. I'm a steward. When I die, which is bound to happen sooner than I would like, either my boys or my son-in-law or somebody else is going to have and have access to and work on the anvils that I have been using, that I've been treasuring, that they will use and treasure, and it will be a long, long time before those anvils are not important to somebody again. So I do have a little more encouragement for you young people who are looking for an anvil, and that is the anvil treasure hunt is never going to be over. There will always be anvils out there for sale for pennies on the dollar compared to the market price as established on eBay, which sometimes is mind-blowing. Anvils will always be coming to the surface where you least expect it. An anvil is waiting to be found somewhere close to where you are. There is somebody in your circle of acquaintance who has somebody in their circle of acquaintance who has an anvil. And my advice on how to find that anvil is the same as it's always been. Make sure everyone who knows you knows that you're looking for an anvil. And don't wear out on that, because they're going to forget, and you're going to remind them. As an anecdote that's really hard to beat, I got a phone call from a guy in connection with the channel. And he called me up to tell me that his friend called him and said, "Hey, come over and look at this." His friend was putting a fence in his backyard and hit something hard and dug it out of the ground and didn't know what it was and called the fellow who called me, and here was an anvil that his buddy had pulled out of the ground digging a post hole. Told him he'd give him $100. Sold. Now, how often in the history of the planet has that happened? Probably once, but there are other ways that it will happen. And it will happen for you if you make it something that is important enough to include it in your day-to-day list of obsessions.